I couldn't help but notice the scene unfolding before my eyes. There they were, sitting at a corner table in the cafe I had walked into purely by chance. My husband Marcus and Elena, my future sister-in-law's mother. The woman who would soon be family through my brother Daniel's upcoming marriage to her daughter Sophia. They weren't just talking. Their hands were intertwined on the table, their faces close enough that I could see the intimacy in every glance they exchanged. My world shattered in that single moment, the coffee cup in my hand suddenly feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I stood frozen in the doorway, my heart pounding so violently I thought everyone in that cafe could hear it. Marcus hadn't seen me yet. Neither had Elena. They were too absorbed in their private world, completely oblivious to the fact that I had just discovered their secret. 7 years of marriage, 7 years of what I thought was love and trust, and here was my husband sharing stolen moments with the one woman who should have been off limits in every conceivable way. My mind raced through every moment of the past 6 months. Every late night Marcus claimed he was working. Every weekend trip he said was for business. Every time he seemed distant, distracted, looking at his phone with a small smile that never quite reached his eyes when he looked at me. Elena had been around more often lately too, always finding reasons to stop by, always so friendly and warm. I had thought she was just excited about the upcoming wedding, eager to bond with our family. Now I understood the real reason for her constant presence. I backed out of that cafe before they could see me, my legs somehow carrying me to my car, even though I felt like collapsing right there on the sidewalk. I sat in the driver's seat for what felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes, trying to process what I had just witnessed. The betrayal wasn't just from Marcus. It was from Elena too, a woman who smiled at me during family dinners, who hugged me and called me sister, who was supposed to become part of our family through her daughter's marriage to my brother. The wedding was only 3 weeks away. Daniel and Sophia had been planning this day for over a year, pouring their hearts and savings into creating the perfect celebration. My brother was so happy, so in love, so excited to start his life with Sophia. And here was Sophia's mother, carrying on an affair with my husband, threatening to destroy not just my marriage, but potentially my brother's happiness too. I drove home in a daze, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. When I walked through the door of the house Marcus and I had bought together 5 years ago, everything looked exactly as I had left it that morning. The breakfast dishes were still in the sink. The throw pillows on the couch were arranged just the way I liked them. Our wedding photos still hung prominently on the living room wall, both of us smiling like we had our whole lives ahead of us. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had changed. I couldn't confront Marcus right away. I needed to think, to plan, to understand the full scope of what was happening before I made any moves. I needed evidence too, because I knew that if I accused him based solely on what I had seen in that cafe, he would deny it. He would gaslight me, make me feel like I was overreacting or misinterpreting an innocent lunch between friends. I had heard enough stories from other women to know how these confrontations could go wrong. So, I waited. When Marcus came home that evening at his usual time, I greeted him with a kiss just like I always did. I asked him about his day, and he told me about meetings and deadlines and office politics, the same stories he always told. Not a single word about lunch with Elena. Not even a flicker of guilt in his eyes. He was so comfortable in his deception, so practiced at living this double life. That night, as Marcus slept beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling and planning my next moves. I wouldn't be the woman who fell apart, who cried and begged and made herself small. I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. Instead, I would be smart about this. I would gather evidence, I would protect myself financially, and I would make sure that both Marcus and Elena faced consequences for what they had done. The next morning, while Marcus was in the shower, I went through his phone. I had never been the type of wife to snoop, had never felt the need to invade his privacy because I trusted him completely. That trust was gone now, and I felt no guilt as I scrolled through his messages. He had deleted most of his conversations with Elena, but he had made one crucial mistake. He hadn't deleted everything. There were a few text messages from the past week, casual enough on the surface, but clearly part of a longer conversation I couldn't see. "Miss you already," one message from Elena read. Last night was perfect. The message was from 2 days ago, a night when Marcus had supposedly been at a work dinner with clients. I took screenshots of everything I could find, sending them to myself and then deleting the evidence that I had done so. I would need more, though. Text messages could be explained away, especially with so much of the conversation missing. I needed something irrefutable. Over the next few days, I became someone I barely recognized. I installed a tracking app on Marcus's phone, hidden among his other apps where he would never notice it. I hired a private investigator, a woman named Rachel who specialized in infidelity cases. I told her everything, showed her the messages I had found, described what I had seen in that cafe. She was professional and sympathetic, promising me that she would get me the proof I needed. I went through our financial records too, making copies of everything. I discovered that Marcus had opened a credit card I didn't know about 6 months earlier. The statements showed charges at hotels, restaurants, jewelry stores. He had bought Elena a bracelet that cost more than he had spent on my last 3 birthdays combined. He was spending our money we had saved together, money that was supposed to be for our future, to fund his affair. The rage I felt was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It burned through me constantly, a white-hot fury that I had to carefully contain whenever Marcus was around. I played my role perfectly, though. I was still the loving wife, still interested in his day, still laughing at his jokes. Inside, I was planning his destruction. Rachel worked fast. Within a week, she had photographs of Marcus and Elena together. They had a routine, she told me. Every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, Marcus would leave work early and meet Elena at a hotel downtown. They would spend 2 or 3 hours there before going their separate ways. Rachel showed me the photos, and I forced myself to look at each one. Marcus and Elena entering the hotel together. Marcus and Elena in the hotel bar, his hand on her thigh. Marcus and Elena kissing in the parking garage, completely unconcerned about who might see them. I kept all of the evidence in a folder hidden in my car. I couldn't risk Marcus finding it, couldn't let him know that I knew until I was ready to strike. The wedding was now just 10 days away, and I had made a decision about how this was going to play out. I wasn't going to confront them privately. I wasn't going to give them the chance to minimize what they had done or to control the narrative. No, I was going to expose them publicly, at the one event where their betrayal would have maximum impact. I know it sounds cruel. I know that Daniel and Sophia would be caught in the crossfire. But I couldn't let this wedding happen with everyone living in ignorance. Sophia deserved to know what kind of woman her mother really was before she legally bound herself to my family. Daniel deserved to know that the woman who would be his mother-in-law had so little respect for family bonds that she would sleep with his sister's husband. And Marcus and Elena deserved to face the consequences of their actions in front of everyone who mattered to them. The days leading up to the wedding were surreal. I attended the final dress fitting with Sophia and her bridesmaids, smiling and laughing as if everything was fine. I went to the rehearsal dinner, sitting beside Marcus at a table that included Elena and her husband Roberto. Yes, Elena had a husband too, a kind and successful architect who clearly adored her. Roberto had no idea he was being betrayed, just as I had been in the dark for so long. At that rehearsal dinner, I watched Elena play her role as the excited mother of the bride. She gave a toast about how happy she was to welcome Daniel into their family, about how she had always wanted a son, and now she would finally have one. She looked right at me during part of that speech, her expression warm and genuine, as if she hadn't been sleeping with my husband for months. The audacity of it was breathtaking. Marcus gave a speech too, talking about his love for me and how he had gained not just a brother-in-law but a friend in Daniel. He held my hand the entire time he spoke, his thumb rubbing gentle circles on my palm like he always did when he wanted to comfort me. I smiled up at him adoringly, and no one in that room had any idea that I was counting down the hours until I destroyed both him and Elena in front of everyone they knew. The night before the wedding, Marcus and I stayed at the hotel where the reception would be held. It was a beautiful historic property with gardens and a ballroom that Sophia had fallen in love with the moment she saw it. Daniel and Sophia were staying there too, along with many of the out-of-town guests. Marcus and I made love that night, and I let myself feel every moment of it, knowing it would be the last time. In the morning, he would cease to be my husband in any meaningful way. I barely slept. My mind kept going over my plan, making sure I had covered every detail. The ceremony was at 2 in the afternoon, followed by cocktail hour and then the reception. I had decided that I would make my move during the reception after the first dances but before the toasts. Maximum attendance, maximum impact, maximum humiliation for Marcus and Elena. The morning of the wedding was chaos in the best possible way. Sophia was radiant in her wedding dress, her excitement infectious as her bridesmaids fussed over every detail. I helped with her makeup, held her hand when she got nervous, told her how beautiful she looked. Part of me felt guilty for what I was about to do to her special day. But a larger part of me knew that better she find out now than after she was legally bound to a family built on lies. The ceremony was beautiful. Daniel cried when he saw Sophia walking down the aisle. Their vows were personal and heartfelt, full of promises about building a life together based on trust and honesty. I had to swallow back bitter laughter at that. Elena sat in the front row, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, the picture of a moved mother. Marcus sat beside me, his hand finding mine and squeezing it during the most emotional moments. The cocktail hour passed in a blur. I drank champagne and made small talk and accepted congratulations on behalf of my brother. Elena and I stood together at one point, watching Daniel and Sophia pose for photos, and she put her arm around my shoulders. "We're family now," she said warmly. I smiled and agreed, thinking about how she would feel about that statement in just a few short hours. Finally, it was time for the reception. The ballroom looked incredible, with flowers and candles and twinkling lights creating a romantic atmosphere. I had my folder of evidence with me, tucked into a large bag I had brought. I had also brought a USB drive with copies of everything, including the photos Rachel had taken. I had spent the previous evening creating a slideshow, set to music, showing Marcus and Elena together in various compromising positions. I had contacted the DJ earlier in the week, telling him that I wanted to surprise my brother and new sister-in-law with a special presentation. He had agreed to help, showing me how to connect to the projection system that would display on large screens throughout the ballroom. Dinner was served. The first dances happened, Daniel and Sophia moving together like they were the only two people in the world, followed by Daniel dancing with Elena and Sophia dancing with her father. Marcus and I danced too, and he whispered in my ear about how beautiful I looked, about how lucky he was to have me. I smiled against his shoulder, counting down the minutes. Then it was time. The DJ, following my instructions, announced that there would be a special presentation before the toasts began. Everyone turned their attention to the screens, expecting to see a sweet montage of Daniel and Sophia's relationship. Instead, they saw the title slide I had created, a different kind of family affair. The first photo appeared on the screen. Marcus and Elena entering a hotel together, both dressed in business attire, looking around carefully before going inside. There was a murmur of confusion in the crowd. The second photo showed them in the hotel bar, sitting close together, his hand on her leg. The murmur grew louder. By the third photo, which showed them kissing in a parking garage, people were gasping and talking openly. I watched from my seat as the slideshow continued. I watched Marcus's face go pale, his eyes wide with horror. I watched Elena stand up from her table, her mouth opening and closing, but no words coming out. I watched Roberto's expression change from confusion to understanding to rage. I watched Sophia burst into tears, Daniel frozen beside her in shock. The slideshow continued for 3 minutes, each photo more damning than the last. I had arranged them chronologically, showing the progression of their affair over months. Hotel entrances, restaurant dates, intimate moments they thought were private. The DJ looked horrified when he realized what he was showing, but I had given him specific instructions not to stop the presentation no matter what happened, and he followed them. When the final photo faded from the screens, the ballroom erupted into chaos. Marcus rushed toward me, his face a mask of panic and rage. "How could you do this?" he shouted at me, as if he was the victim in this situation. "How could you ruin your brother's wedding?" I stood up, looking him directly in the eye for the first time since discovering his betrayal. "How could I?" I said, My voice calmed despite the adrenaline coursing through my body. You slept with my future sister-in-law's mother. You betrayed me, you betrayed your vows, and you betrayed this entire family. Don't you dare make this about what I did. Elena was being confronted by Roberto, his voice rising as he demanded answers. She was crying, trying to explain, but he wasn't listening. He grabbed his coat and stormed out, leaving her standing alone in the middle of the ballroom with hundreds of people staring at her. Sophia ran from the ballroom, still in her wedding dress, Daniel chasing after her. My parents and Elena's ex-husband were trying to calm people down, but it was useless. The wedding was effectively over. Guests were leaving, talking in shocked whispers, pulling out their phones to text people who weren't there about what they had just witnessed. I gathered my things and walked out of that ballroom with my head held high. Marcus tried to follow me, still trying to explain or justify or minimize what he had done, but I ignored him. I had said everything I needed to say through that slideshow. There were no words that could make any of this better. I drove home and immediately started packing. I called a divorce attorney I had already consulted with the week before, telling her that it was time to move forward with the paperwork. I called a locksmith and had him change all the locks on the house. I called my bank and froze our joint accounts. By the time Marcus made it home a few hours later, he couldn't get in, and I had already moved the most important of my belongings to a storage unit. He called my phone repeatedly, sent dozens of text messages, but I didn't respond. I had blocked Elena's number days earlier, anticipating that she might try to contact me after everything came out. I didn't want to hear excuses or apologies. Nothing they could say would change what they had done. The fallout was immediate and severe. Roberto filed for divorce within days, citing infidelity. He had been suspicious for a while, he later told me when we spoke briefly, but Elena had always managed to convince him he was being paranoid. Seeing the photos had confirmed what he had feared for months. Sophia called off her wedding to Daniel. She was devastated, heartbroken not just by what her mother had done but by the public humiliation of having her wedding day destroyed. She couldn't look at Daniel without thinking about how his family and her family were now connected by betrayal and scandal. Daniel was angry with me at first. He felt that I could have handled things differently, that I could have confronted Marcus and Elena privately and spared Sophia the trauma of having her wedding ruined. But as the shock wore off and he had time to process everything, he came to understand why I had done what I did. He realized that if I had handled it privately, Marcus and Elena might have convinced us to keep quiet for the sake of the wedding. Sophia would have married into our family without knowing the truth, and the lies would have continued to grow and fester. My parents were supportive, though also somewhat shell-shocked by the whole situation. My mother admitted that she had thought Marcus and I had the perfect marriage. She had never suspected anything was wrong. My father, typically quiet and reserved, was furious on my behalf. He called Marcus and told him he was no longer welcome at family events, that he had betrayed not just me, but the entire family's trust. Marcus tried to win me back for weeks. He sent flowers, wrote long emails, showed up at my office begging for a chance to explain. According to him, it had started innocently, just conversations that became more frequent and intimate over time. He claimed he never meant for it to happen, that he still loved me, that Elena had pursued him. He threw her under the bus completely, trying to paint himself as the victim of her seduction. I didn't believe a word of it. The evidence showed a mutual affair, two people who had made deliberate choices to betray their spouses and their families. There were hundreds of text messages between them, emails, receipts for gifts, and hotel rooms. This wasn't a one-time mistake or a moment of weakness. This was a sustained, calculated betrayal that had gone on for at least 6 months, possibly longer. The divorce proceedings were brutal. Marcus tried to fight me on every point, refusing to accept that the marriage was over. He wanted to keep the house, wanted spousal support despite making significantly more money than I did, wanted to split my retirement accounts. My attorney was excellent though, and the evidence of his affair worked strongly in my favor. The judge was not sympathetic to a man who had carried on an affair with his future sister-in-law's mother and then tried to claim he deserved to profit from the divorce. Elena's life fell apart just as completely as Marcus's did. Roberto divorced her and got custody of their younger children, two teenagers who wanted nothing to do with their mother after what she had done. Sophia cut off all contact, refusing to speak to or see Elena despite her mother's repeated attempts at reconciliation. Elena lost her job when the scandal became public knowledge. She worked at a private school, and the administration felt that her behavior reflected poorly on the institution's values. She had to sell her house and move into a small apartment across town. I felt no sympathy for either of them. They had made their choices, and now they were facing the consequences. Some people in my social circle thought I had been too harsh, that I should have handled things privately for the sake of preserving the family relationships. But those people didn't understand what it felt like to be betrayed so completely. They didn't understand the rage that came from discovering that the person you trusted most in the world had been lying to your face for months while sleeping with someone who was supposed to become family. As the months passed, I began to rebuild my life. I threw myself into my work, earning a promotion I had been working toward for years. I reconnected with friends I had somewhat neglected during my marriage, rediscovering hobbies and interests that had fallen by the wayside. I started therapy to work through the trauma of the betrayal and the complex emotions around how I had chosen to expose it. My therapist asked me once if I regretted exposing Marcus and Elena so publicly. I thought about it carefully before answering. Did I regret that Daniel and Sophia's wedding was ruined? Yes, absolutely. Did I regret that their special day would forever be associated with scandal and betrayal instead of joy and celebration? Of course I did. But did I regret exposing the truth? No. Not for a second. Because the truth is that secrets like that don't stay hidden forever. Eventually, the affair would have come out, whether through a careless mistake or someone else discovering it. And the longer it went on, the more people would be hurt by it. Sophia would have been married to Daniel, legally bound to a family that included Marcus and me. Elena would have been a permanent fixture at family events, sitting across from me at holiday dinners and birthday parties, smiling and pretending while continuing to sleep with my husband. By exposing them when I did, I forced everyone to confront the reality of the situation. I took away Marcus and Elena's ability to control the narrative or minimize what they had done. I made sure that everyone knew exactly who they were and what they were capable of. Some people might call that revenge, and maybe it was. But it was also justice. Daniel eventually forgave me fully, understanding that I had been in an impossible situation. He and Sophia tried to reconcile for a few months, but the damage to their relationship was too severe. They broke up about 6 months after the wedding disaster, both recognizing that they couldn't move past what had happened. Daniel was heartbroken, but he also acknowledged that it was probably for the best. The foundation of trust that a marriage needs had been shattered, and they couldn't rebuild it. Sophia and I actually became friends in an unexpected way. We bonded over our shared experience of being betrayed by people we trusted. She told me that while she had been devastated by what happened at her wedding, she was ultimately grateful that she found out about her mother's character before making a legal commitment to my family. She had always put her mother on a pedestal, seeing her as perfect and loving and honorable. Learning the truth had been painful, but it had also freed her from unrealistic expectations. The divorce was finalized 8 months after that disastrous wedding reception. I got the house, a significant portion of our savings, and my freedom. Marcus got to keep his car and his furniture and the knowledge that his reputation was destroyed. People in our social circle knew what he had done. His colleagues at work knew. Even his own family had distanced themselves from him, embarrassed by his behavior. Elena and Marcus didn't stay together after everything fell apart. Without the thrill of secrecy and forbidden romance, their relationship couldn't survive in the real world. They tried for a few weeks, but the reality of what they had destroyed to be together was too heavy. Marcus blamed Elena for pursuing him. Elena blamed Marcus for not being strong enough to resist. In the end, they went their separate ways, both alone and both facing the consequences of their choices. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Marcus tried to date again about a year after our divorce was finalized. But women in our social circle weren't interested. His reputation preceded him. Everyone knew he was the type of man who would cheat on his wife with his future sister-in-law's mother. That kind of betrayal marked him in a way that was hard to overcome. He eventually moved to a different city, trying to start fresh where people didn't know his history. Elena had a similar experience. Her attempts to rebuild her social life were met with cool indifference at best and outright hostility at worst. Women didn't trust her. Men saw her as a cautionary tale. She had lost her marriage, her relationship with her daughter, her job, and her reputation, all for an affair that had lasted only months and had been built on deception. People sometimes ask me if the revenge was worth it. They ask if I feel like I got closure or if exposing Marcus and Elena so publicly brought me peace. The truth is more complicated than a simple yes or no. Did I feel satisfied watching them face consequences for their actions? Yes. Did I feel vindicated when I heard that their lives had fallen apart? Absolutely. But did it erase the pain of betrayal? Did it heal the wound of discovering that the man I loved and trusted had been lying to me for months? No. That kind of hurt doesn't go away just because the people who caused it face consequences. What the exposure did do was give me power in a situation where I had felt completely powerless. When I saw Marcus and Elena together in that cafe, I felt like the ground had dropped out from under me. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and helpless. By taking control of how the truth came out, by deciding when and where and how their affair would be exposed, I took back some of that power. I refused to be the victim who found out and quietly went away. I made them face what they had done in front of everyone who mattered to them. In the years since that wedding day, I have built a new life for myself. I bought a smaller house in a different neighborhood, a fresh start without any memories of Marcus. I advanced in my career, finding satisfaction and purpose in my work. I dated occasionally, though I was cautious and slow to trust. The betrayal had left scars that took time to heal. I also learned a lot about myself through the experience. I learned that I was stronger than I thought, capable of surviving something that I once would have thought would destroy me. I learned that I could be strategic and calculating when necessary, planning and executing a course of action, even while my heart was breaking. And I learned that revenge, while satisfying in the moment, isn't ultimately what heals you. Time, therapy, self-reflection, and building a new life are what heal you. Daniel eventually met someone new, a woman named Jessica, who had no connection to any of the drama that had torn apart his engagement to Sophia. They dated for 2 years before getting engaged, and their wedding was a small, intimate affair with just close family and friends. I was his best woman, standing beside him as he married someone who made him truly happy. Watching him rebuild his life and find love again gave me hope that I could do the same. Sophia also moved on, though it took her longer. She went to therapy to work through her relationship with her mother and the trauma of having her wedding day destroyed. She eventually reached out to Elena, not to rebuild their relationship, but to tell her directly how much pain she had caused and to set firm boundaries going forward. Sophia made it clear that while she might someday be able to forgive, she would never forget, and their relationship would never be what it once was. My relationship with my parents deepened through all of this. They saw me at my lowest point and at my strongest, and they supported me unconditionally through all of it. My mother told me once that she was proud of how I had handled everything, even though she wished I hadn't had to go through it at all. My father, in his quiet way, made sure I knew that he would always be there for me no matter what. As for Marcus and Elena, I eventually stopped keeping track of what happened to them. In the immediate aftermath, I had wanted to know every detail of how their lives were falling apart. It felt important to confirm that they were suffering consequences for what they had done. But as time went on and I healed, I realized that I didn't need to know anymore. Their lives were no longer my concern. What they did or didn't do, whether they found happiness or continued to struggle, had nothing to do with me. I will never forget walking into that cafe and seeing them together. I will never forget the way my world tilted on its axis in that moment, the way everything I thought I knew suddenly became questionable. But I also will never forget that I survived it. I made it through something that felt unsurvivable at the time. I picked up the pieces of my life and put them back together in a new configuration, one that was stronger and more authentic than before. The revenge, if that's what you want to call it, was just one part of a much longer journey. It was the moment where I took back control, where I refused to let Marcus and Elena manage the narrative or hide their betrayal behind closed doors. It was dramatic and messy, and it hurt people I cared about. But it also forced everyone to confront an ugly truth that otherwise might have stayed hidden for years, causing even more damage in the long run. Looking back now with the clarity that comes from time and distance, I understand that what I did was both revenge and self-preservation. It was about punishing Marcus and Elena for their betrayal, yes, but it was also about protecting myself and others from being deceived any longer. It was about refusing to be complicit in keeping their secret, refusing to prioritize their comfort over the truth. Would I do it differently if I could go back in time? Maybe. I might have chosen a different venue than my brother's wedding, though finding another occasion where both families would be present and vulnerable to the revelation would have been difficult. I might have given Daniel a heads up about what I was planning so he could prepare Sophia. But I wouldn't change the fundamental decision to expose them publicly rather than privately. That was the right choice for me, and I stand by it even now. The experience taught me that betrayal changes you. It makes you question your judgment, your ability to trust your own instincts. If I couldn't see that my husband was having an affair right under my nose, what else was I blind to? That self-doubt was one of the hardest things to overcome. It took a long time and a lot of therapy to rebuild my confidence in my own perceptions and judgments. It also taught me that people are capable of extraordinary selfishness. Marcus and Elena weren't cruel people in general. They were ordinary people who made selfish choices and rationalized them away. They told themselves whatever they needed to tell themselves to justify what they were doing. Marcus probably convinced himself that our marriage was already troubled, that he deserved happiness even if it hurt me. Elena probably convinced herself that what Roberto didn't know wouldn't hurt him, that she was still a good mother even while betraying her daughter's future family. The human capacity for self-deception is remarkable. We can twist almost anything to fit the narrative we want to believe about ourselves. Marcus and Elena weren't evil villains in their own stories. They were probably the heroes, star-crossed lovers who had found each other despite the complications. They probably felt passionate and alive and justified in their choices right up until the moment those photos appeared on the screens at that wedding reception. I think about that sometimes, about how we're all the heroes of our own stories, how we can rationalize almost anything if we try hard enough. It makes me more careful about my own choices, more willing to question my motivations and hold myself accountable. Because if Marcus could betray me while still seeing himself as a good person, then I'm capable of moral failures too, if I'm not vigilant. The other thing I learned is that closure is a myth. There's no magical moment where everything makes sense and the pain goes away. There's no perfect revenge that heals all wounds. You just keep moving forward, day by day, processing the hurt and building a new normal. Some days are easier than others. Some days you still feel the anger or the sadness or the sense of betrayal. But gradually, those days become fewer and further between. I think about the person I was before I walked into that cafe, and she feels like a stranger to me now. That version of me was more naive, more trusting, more comfortable. She believed that her marriage was solid, that she knew her husband completely, that betrayal was something that happened to other people. She had no idea what she was capable of when pushed to her limits. The person I am now is harder, more cynical maybe, but also more resilient. I know what I'm capable of surviving. I know that I can be strategic and ruthless when necessary to protect myself. I know that I don't need anyone else to complete me or make me whole. Those are valuable lessons, even if I wish I had learned them in less painful ways. I eventually did start dating again, about 2 years after the divorce was finalized. It was terrifying at first. Every time someone showed interest in me, I immediately started looking for signs that they were lying or hiding something. I had to consciously work on not letting my experience with Marcus poison all my future relationships. Some men I dated couldn't handle the intensity of my trust issues. Others were patient and understanding, willing to move at my pace and earn my trust gradually. I'm currently in a relationship with someone named David. We met through mutual friends and we took things very slowly at first. He knew about my divorce and the circumstances around it. Everyone in our social circle knew the story by that point. It was oddly freeing to date someone who already knew my history. I didn't have to figure out when and how to tell him about what Marcus had done. He came into the relationship with full knowledge of my baggage. David is patient and honest in ways that I didn't fully appreciate until I had experienced the alternative. He doesn't play games. He doesn't hide his phone or make mysterious plans. He tells me where he's going and who he's with without me even having to ask. At first, I thought maybe he was just being careful because he knew about my past. But as I've gotten to know him better, I've realized that's just who he is. He's someone who values transparency and straightforward communication. We've been together for a year now, and while I'm not ready to remarry or even move in together, I'm hopeful about the future in a way I wasn't for a long time after the divorce. David understands that I need to take things at my own pace. He doesn't push for more commitment than I'm ready to give. He's building trust through consistent actions over time, and it's working. Sometimes I wonder what my life would look like if I had never walked into that cafe that day. If I had remained blissfully ignorant of Marcus's affair, would it still be going on? Would it have eventually ended on its own? Would Marcus have left me for Elena, or would they have continued their affair indefinitely while maintaining their respective marriages? There's no way to know, and in the end, it doesn't matter. I did see them that day, and everything that followed was a consequence of that moment. I've also thought about what would have happened if I had confronted them privately instead of exposing them at the wedding. Marcus probably would have apologized and begged for forgiveness. Elena would have done the same with Roberto. They might have convinced us to keep quiet about what happened to avoid embarrassing Sophia and derailing her wedding. We would have sat through that ceremony and reception, all of us knowing the truth but pretending everything was fine for the sake of maintaining appearances. And then what? Even if Marcus had ended the affair, even if Elena had done the same, could I have stayed married to him knowing what he had done? Could Roberto have stayed married to Elena? Could Daniel and Sophia have built a marriage on that foundation of secrets and lies? I don't think so. The truth would have eaten away at all of us, poisoning every family gathering, every holiday, every milestone. Better that everything exploded when it did, painful and messy as it was. Sophia told me once, about a year after everything happened, that she was grateful to me for exposing the affair when I did. She said that if she had married Daniel and then found out later, it would have been so much worse. She would have been legally bound to a family that included me and Marcus, forced to interact with people who had hidden such a massive secret from her. Finding out before the wedding, while traumatic, at least gave her the freedom to make choices about her future with full knowledge of the situation. That conversation meant a lot to me. I had carried guilt about ruining her wedding day for months. Even though I believed I had done the right thing, even though I stood by my decision, I still felt terrible that Sophia had been hurt by it. Hearing her say that she was ultimately grateful helped ease some of that guilt. It didn't erase it completely, but it helped me feel more at peace with my choices. Daniel took longer to come around to that perspective, but he eventually got there too. He told me that while he wished things had happened differently, he understood why I did what I did. He said that the alternative, living with the secret and watching Marcus and Elena continue their affair while everyone pretended not to know, would have been untenable. At least this way, everyone knew where they stood. The cards were all on the table. My relationship with my brother is stronger now than it was before all of this happened. We went through something terrible together, and it forced us to communicate more openly and honestly than we had in years. We both learned that sometimes the right thing to do is also the hardest thing to do, and that protecting someone from painful truths isn't actually protecting them at all. As for my relationship with Elena's daughter Sophia, it remains complicated but cordial. We're not close friends, but we're not enemies either. We bonded over our shared experience of being betrayed by our mother figure, in my case my husband, and in her case her actual mother. We text occasionally, meet for coffee, every few months. There's an understanding between us that comes from shared trauma. Roberto, Elena's ex-husband, and I also developed an unexpected friendship. We were both betrayed by our spouses, both humiliated in the same public forum. He reached out to me a few months after everything happened, and we met for coffee. It was therapeutic to talk to someone who understood exactly what I was going through. We compared notes on the warning signs we had missed, the lies we had been told, the ways Marcus and Elena had managed to carry on their affair right under our noses. Roberto told me that he had suspected something was wrong for months before everything came out. Elena had been distant and distracted, always on her phone, making excuses to leave the house. But every time he had tried to talk to her about it, she had made him feel like he was being paranoid and controlling. She had gaslit him so effectively that he had started to doubt his own perceptions. Hearing that made me feel less foolish for not seeing the signs sooner. I had noticed some changes in Marcus too, the late nights and distant behavior, but he had always had a plausible explanation. And because I trusted him completely, because I believed in our marriage, I had accepted those explanations without question. Trust, I learned, can be both a beautiful thing and a vulnerability that manipulative people exploit. The private investigator I hired, Rachel, became someone I stayed in touch with as well. She had seen me at one of the lowest points of my life, had helped me gather the evidence I needed to confront the reality of my situation. After the divorce was finalized, she checked in on me to see how I was doing. We got coffee and ended up having a long conversation about her work and the patterns she saw in infidelity cases. Rachel told me that my case was unusual not because of the affair itself, those were depressingly common, but because of how I chose to handle the exposure. Most of her clients, she said, confronted their cheating spouses privately and tried to work things out or ended the relationship quietly. Very few chose the route I did, exposing the affair in such a dramatic and public way. She asked me if I regretted it, and I told her the same thing I had told my therapist, no. The publicity of the exposure had protected me in important ways. It had made it impossible for Marcus to lie about why our marriage ended. Everyone knew he had cheated, and that knowledge protected my reputation and my dignity. If we had divorced quietly, he could have spun the narrative however he wanted, maybe suggesting that I was unstable or that we had simply grown apart. Instead, everyone knew the truth, and that truth worked in my favor. It also protected me financially during the divorce proceedings. The judge who handled our case was clearly influenced by the evidence of Marcus's affair and the particularly egregious nature of it, having an affair with someone who was about to become family through his brother-in-law's marriage. That worked in my favor when it came to dividing assets and determining spousal support. And perhaps most importantly, the public exposure prevented Marcus and Elena from downplaying or minimizing what they had done. They couldn't claim it was just a brief mistake or a moment of weakness. The evidence showed a sustained, calculated affair that had gone on for months. They couldn't gaslight their spouses or rewrite history to make themselves look better. The truth was there for everyone to see, undeniable and damning. The psychological aftermath of betrayal is something I don't think people fully understand unless they've experienced it. It's not just the hurt feelings or the damaged pride. It's the way it shakes your fundamental sense of reality. Everything you thought you knew becomes questionable. If your spouse could lie to your face for months while sleeping with someone else, what else might be a lie? Can you trust your own judgment? Can you trust anyone? I struggled with that for a long time. I second-guessed every memory of my marriage, wondering what had been real and what had been performance. When Marcus said he loved me, did he mean it? When he made plans for our future, was he sincere? Or was I just the convenient wife at home while he pursued excitement and passion with Elena? I'll probably never know the answers to those questions, and I've had to make peace with that uncertainty. Therapy helped enormously. My therapist specialized in trauma recovery, and she helped me understand that what I had experienced was a form of trauma. It wasn't physical violence, but it was a violation of trust so profound that it had similar psychological effects. She taught me coping strategies for dealing with the intrusive thoughts and the anxiety. She helped me work through the anger and the grief, both of which came in waves when I least expected them. One thing my therapist emphasized was the importance of not letting Marcus and Elena's betrayal define me. It would have been easy to become bitter and cynical, to close myself off from the possibility of future relationships because of what they had done. And for a while, that's exactly what I did. But with time and work, I was able to recognize that their choices said everything about them and nothing about me. I hadn't deserved what they did. There was nothing I could have done differently to prevent it. Their betrayal was about their own selfishness and moral failings, not about any inadequacy on my part. That's a lesson I wish I had learned earlier. In the immediate aftermath of discovering the affair, I tortured myself with questions about what I had done wrong. Was I not attractive enough? Not interesting enough? Had I been too focused on my career? Too comfortable in the marriage? Had I somehow driven Marcus into Elena's arms through some failure on my part? My therapist helped me see that these questions were a way of trying to maintain the illusion of control. If I had done something wrong, then I could fix it and prevent future betrayals. But the reality was that I couldn't control other people's choices. Marcus and Elena had made their decisions independently of anything I had or hadn't done. The financial aftermath of the divorce was complicated too. Even though I got a favorable settlement, divorcing after 7 years of marriage meant disentangling our lives in ways that were both expensive and emotionally draining. We had joint bank accounts, shared credit cards, co-owned property. Every financial thread of our lives was woven together, and pulling them apart required lawyers and accountants and endless paperwork. I had to rebuild my financial independence from scratch. I opened new bank accounts, established credit in my own name, created a budget for my new single life. It was liberating in some ways, having complete control over my money without having to consult anyone else. But it was also scary. For 7 years, I had been part of a financial unit, making decisions jointly with Marcus. Being solely responsible for my finances felt overwhelming at first. The social aftermath was perhaps the most unexpectedly difficult part. Marcus and I had built a social circle together over the years, couples we had dinner with regularly, friends we vacationed with. After the divorce, I lost some of those friendships. Some people felt they had to choose sides, and they chose Marcus. Others simply felt uncomfortable around me, not knowing what to say or how to act. The social life I had built as part of a couple disappeared, and I had to create a new one as a single woman. That process was harder than I expected. Most of my couple friends gradually stopped including me in gatherings. I wasn't invited to dinner parties anymore because I didn't fit the couple's dynamic. I wasn't invited to game nights or weekend trips. Some people reached out initially to express their support, but those relationships faded over time. It was like Marcus and I had been one entity in our social circle, and once we split, I became half of something incomplete rather than a whole person in my own right. I had to actively work on building a new social circle. I reconnected with old friends I had drifted away from during my marriage. I joined a book club and a hiking group. I said yes to invitations even when I didn't feel like socializing. Slowly, I built a new network of friendships based on who I was as an individual rather than who I had been as Marcus's wife. These new friendships were stronger in some ways because they were built on authentic connection rather than convenience or shared couple status. One unexpected source of support came from online communities of people who had experienced similar betrayals. I found forums and social media groups where people shared their stories of infidelity and divorce. Reading about other people's experiences helped me feel less alone. I realized that what I was going through, while unique in its specific details, was part of a common human experience of betrayal and recovery. I even share my own story in one of these forums, though I changed names and identifying details for privacy. The response was overwhelming. Hundreds of people commented, sharing their own experiences, offering support and advice. Some people praised me for how I had handled the exposure. Others criticized me for ruining my brother's wedding. But everyone understood the pain of betrayal, and that shared understanding was comforting. The anniversary of the wedding, and therefore the anniversary of the exposure, was harder than I expected. Even though I had moved on in many ways, even though I was building a new life, that date brought everything back. I found myself reliving the whole experience, from discovering the affair to planning the exposure to watching those photos appear on the screens at the reception. I took the day off work and let myself feel whatever came up, grief and anger and satisfaction and regret all mixed together. My therapist had warned me that anniversaries of traumatic events often trigger emotional responses even years later. She encouraged me to plan ahead for that day, to have a support system in place and self-care strategies ready. I followed her advice, and it helped. I had friends on call who I could text if I needed to talk. I had comfort activities planned. I gave myself permission to feel whatever came up without judgment. As the years have passed, the intensity of the emotions has faded. The anniversary still marks itself on my internal calendar, but it doesn't devastate me the way it did in the early years. I can think about what happened without the overwhelming rush of anger and hurt. I can acknowledge that the experience changed me while also recognizing that it doesn't define me. I've also gained perspective on the complexity of revenge. At the time, exposing Marcus and Elena felt like pure justice. They had done something terrible, and I was making sure they faced consequences. But with time and distance, I can see the shades of gray. Yes, they deserved to be exposed. Yes, their behavior was inexcusable. But my method of exposure also caused collateral damage that affected innocent people. Daniel and Sophia lost their wedding day. Instead of having happy memories of the start of their marriage, they have memories of scandal and betrayal. My parents and Elena's ex-husband were humiliated in front of their extended families and communities. The story spread through our social circles and beyond, becoming gossip that followed everyone involved for years. My revenge wasn't surgical. It was a bomb that took out the guilty parties but also damaged people in the blast radius. Would I do it differently now, knowing what I know? I honestly don't know. Part of me still believes that the public exposure was necessary, that anything less would have allowed Marcus and Elena to control the narrative and minimize their betrayal. But another part of me wishes I had found a way to expose them that didn't involve destroying Daniel and Sophia's wedding. Maybe I could have waited a few weeks. Maybe I could have called a family meeting and presented the evidence there. Maybe there was a middle ground between silent suffering and nuclear option that I was too hurt and angry to see at the time. But maybe not. Maybe there was no good way to handle a situation that fundamentally awful. Maybe every option would have caused pain and damage in different ways. I made the choice I made based on what I knew and felt at the time, and I have to live with the consequences of that choice just as Marcus and Elena have to live with the consequences of their affair. One thing I know for certain is that revenge doesn't heal you. It can feel satisfying in the moment. It can give you a sense of power and control when you feel powerless. But it doesn't actually undo what was done. It doesn't make the betrayal hurt less. It doesn't restore trust or innocence or the belief that people are fundamentally good. Those things heal with time and work and support and self-reflection, not with revenge. The real healing came from rebuilding my life piece by piece. From learning to trust myself again. From opening up to the possibility of new relationships, even though I was scared. From finding meaning and purpose in my work and my friendships and my own company. From forgiving myself for not seeing the affair sooner, for choosing to marry Marcus in the first place, for all the ways I blamed myself for his choices. That's where the healing happened, in the quiet daily work of putting myself back together. I still carry scars from what happened. I'm probably more guarded than I would have been if I had never experienced that betrayal. I'm quicker to question, slower to trust, more vigilant about red flags. But I'm also stronger, more resilient, more confident in my ability to survive difficult things. Marcus and Elena tried to break me with their betrayal. Instead, they proved to me just how unbreakable I actually am. Looking forward now, I'm hopeful about the future in ways I wasn't for a long time. I have a career I'm proud of, friendships that sustain me, a new relationship that's growing slowly and healthily. I've learned to find joy in small things and to appreciate the people in my life who showed up for me when everything fell apart. I've learned that I can be alone without being lonely, that I'm enough all by myself. And I've learned that betrayal, while devastating, doesn't have to destroy you. It can destroy your marriage, your trust, your belief in a particular person or relationship. But it doesn't have to destroy your essential self. You can survive it. You can grow from it. You can become someone stronger and wiser because of it, even though you would never have chosen to go through it. If I could go back and give advice to the woman I was on the day I walked into that cafe and saw my husband with his mistress, I would tell her that she's going to be okay. Not right away. Not easily. But eventually, she's going to rebuild her life into something good and meaningful. I would tell her that the revenge she's planning will be satisfying but not healing, and that she should think carefully about the collateral damage before she acts. And I would tell her that she is so much stronger than she knows, capable of surviving things she currently thinks would destroy her. But I can't go back, and maybe that's okay. Maybe I needed to learn these lessons the hard way. Maybe the woman I've become, forged in the fire of that betrayal and its aftermath, is someone I couldn't have become any other way. Maybe everything that happened, as painful as it was somehow necessary for my growth and evolution as a person. What I know now is that I saw my husband with his mistress, my sister-in-law's future mother-in-law, and I swore revenge. I got that revenge in the most dramatic way possible. And then I had to live with the consequences of both their betrayal and my response to it. I had to rebuild my life from the ruins of my marriage. I had to learn who I was outside of being Marcus's wife. I had to figure out how to trust again, how to love again, how to be vulnerable again after being hurt so profoundly. The journey has been long and difficult, but I'm still here. I'm still standing. I'm still capable of hope and joy and love. Marcus and Elena's betrayal didn't destroy me, even though there were times when it felt like it might. Instead, it revealed strengths I didn't know I had and taught me lessons I never wanted to learn but that have ultimately made me a better, stronger person. And that, in the end, is the best revenge of all. Not the public humiliation at the wedding reception. Not the divorces and lost jobs and damaged reputations. The best revenge is that I survived, I healed, and I built a life I'm proud of. The best revenge is that I didn't let their betrayal turn me into someone bitter and broken. The best revenge is that I'm happy now, genuinely happy, in ways I never was even in the supposedly good years of my marriage to Marcus. So, yes, I saw my husband with his mistress. Yes, I swore revenge and carried it out in spectacular fashion.
But more importantly, I survived.
I healed. I thrived. And that's the story I want to tell. Not just the story of betrayal and revenge, but the story of resilience and recovery and refusing to let other people's choices define my worth or determine my future. The woman I am today is someone the woman I was before that cafe would barely recognize. I'm harder in some ways, softer in others. I'm more careful with my trust, but also more generous with my compassion, because I know what it's like to hurt in ways you never thought possible. I'm less naive, but also less judgmental, because I've learned that people are complex and capable of both great kindness and terrible selfishness, sometimes even the same people. I've learned that revenge is a dish that's never as satisfying as you think it will be, but that doesn't mean you were wrong to seek it. I've learned that betrayal changes you in fundamental ways, but you get to decide whether those changes make you bitter or better. I've learned that the opposite of love isn't hate but indifference, and that the real victory is when you can think about the person who hurt you and feel nothing at all. I'm not there yet with Marcus and Elena. I still feel flashes of anger sometimes when I think about what they did. But those flashes are getting less frequent and less intense. More and more, when I think about them, I just feel sad. Sad for what might have been. Sad for the pain they caused so many people. Sad for the choices they made that destroyed their own lives along with everyone else's. But mostly, I don't think about them at all anymore. I'm too busy living my life, building my future, loving the people who deserve my love. And that, I think, is the ultimate victory. Not the revenge I took at the wedding. Not the consequences they faced afterward. But the simple fact that I moved on, that I built something new and good from the ashes of what they destroyed. So this is my story. The story of seeing my husband with his mistress, of planning and executing a dramatic public revenge, and of rebuilding my life in the aftermath. It's messy and complicated, and I made choices that hurt people even though they weren't my primary targets. But it's my story, and I own all of it, the good and the bad, the justified and the questionable, the pain and the healing. And if someone else finds themselves in a similar situation, discovering a betrayal that shakes the foundation of their world, I hope my story offers them something useful. Maybe it's permission to be angry, to want revenge, to not just accept betrayal quietly. Maybe it's a cautionary tale about thinking through the consequences before acting on that desire for revenge. Maybe it's simply proof that you can survive something that feels unsurvivable, that you can come out the other side changed but not destroyed. Whatever you take from my story, I hope it includes this. You are stronger than you know. You deserve better than betrayal, and you have the power to rebuild your life into something beautiful even after it's been torn apart. That's what I learned, and that's what I want to pass on to anyone else who's walking the painful path I once walked. The betrayal happened. The revenge happened. The rebuilding happened. And now, finally, the peace is happening. Not perfect peace, not the absence of all difficult emotions, but the deep peace that comes from knowing you survived something terrible and came out stronger on the other side. That's the gift hidden in the devastation, the growth that comes from suffering, the wisdom that emerges from pain. And as much as I wish I had never needed to learn these lessons, I'm grateful for who I've become because of them.